Next up, we have Marisa Agarwal.
Hi, half a day. I'm the next up in the Guam contingent, taking a little bit different tactic. I didn't actually do restoration here, but it still fits the theme of the conference, so here I am. But today I'm going to be talking to you guys about evaluating community change and creating relevant baselines for restoration. So, as I'm sure most of us know here, establishing what historical communities look like is really important for both the restoration that we're doing today, as well as what we're planning to do in the future. Understanding the extent of ecosystem change through time lets us know if our ecosystem is degraded or if it's doing better, and generally gives us a sense of what's going on in our system. It's also really important to look at historical data because we want to avoid the shifting baseline syndrome. So the questions I wanted to ask here were, 1, how have coral communities changed over the past 22 years on Guam's reef flats? And 2, what can we learn from any of the differences or lack of differences that we identify? So to do this, I turned to War in the Pacific National Historical Park. This is again a map of Guam, and these two units are part of one of the NPS units in Micronesia. So within each of these two units, I did 10 transects on both the outer reef flat and then another 10 on the inner reef flat. So this is at Asin, and then again down south at Agate. To address my questions, I replicated the methods of Amesbury et al., and they did their study in 1999, and that's going to be the historical study, which I referenced the rest of this talk. They used the point-centered quarter method, which you've probably never heard of it. It came from forestry in the 1950s. But what they did in 99 was lay out a transect with a bunch of random points overlaid on top of it, and then at each of those points, they measured the distance from the nearest coral colony to that center point, and then they measured the, basically the length and the width of each colony to get an estimate of size of each coral colony. From there, you can extrapolate species richness, percent cover, and community composition, which is basically what I did, and then you do a bunch of stats to analyze your data. So the first metric of community change that I looked at was diversity, and what I found was that both reef flat position as well as survey year were significant factors. So in terms of reef flat position, we actually found that the outer reef flat had higher diversity than the inner reef flat. In terms of survey year, this was a surprising result I didn't expect, but we saw higher diversity in 2022 as compared to 1999 at almost all of the locations. Next, I looked at percent cover, and here the only significant factor in the model was site. Asin, the Asin unit, which is more north, had overall a higher percent cover than the Agate unit. In terms of differences between locations within the reef flat, there was one significant pairwise difference where the outer reef flat had significantly higher cover than the inner reef flat at Agate. Finally, I wanted to look at community composition. So this compares data from 1999 again to 2022, and you can see that across both of those years there were 3 main species that were most common along these transects: Poeciloper damicornis, Parietes massive, which we lumped as a group because we don't know how to resolve those species just by looking, and Leptastria purpurea. All 3 of those, anyone here from Guam will tell you you see them everywhere. This is another way to look at that data, and what this tells you is that in 1999 there were no statistically significant differences in community composition between the outer reef flat and the inner reef flat. That's in comparison to in 2022, where at Agate there actually were community composition differences between the inner reef flat and the outer reef flat. So overall, since 1999, we actually saw that reef flat coral diversity increased, pretty crazy. And we also saw that percent cover hasn't significantly dropped. Now, the heavy disclaimer, this is from the reef flat, very different than the reef slope in Guam, and a lot of the areas that I'm looking at here in my study are not the most pristine areas to start with. So, disclaimer on that. Guam has definitely experienced percent cover drops. Don't get me wrong. We also saw that coral community composition has shifted in some areas. But overall, reef flat location was really important, and it impacted differences in both diversity and percent cover. So why do we care? Basically, the main takeaway from this presentation is that if you have historical data available, you should look at it. It can help you plan restoration priorities. Like if you're looking at your target species, do you want to focus on restoring species that used to be in your system or those that are there today? Or in terms of outplanting areas, do you want to restore or do you want to outplant to areas that have high cover today, low cover today, or those that had high or low cover in the past? Just so that you're optimizing your restoration activities and doing a good job overall. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time.